Hello and welcome to Dice and Demons. I'm Emma and today I want to show you how I paint a truck for my Ork army for Warhammer 40,000. And you'll probably notice that this is a scratch built Ork Trukk, and if you are interested in how I build it, I have another video that I'll leave a link to in the show notes where I show you how I built another truck with more or less like 100% the same techniques. So if you are interested in that, I'll refer you to the show notes. In this video, I'll just show you how I paint it. So I start off with a sort of orc skull thing built out of plastic card, and I have just primed it with a white primer. I believe this is the White Scars primer from Citadal. And then I take a pencil, as you can see, and I draw in some freehand designs. I think I need at least some sort of stripes, and I also need some checkers because, I mean, this is after all for the orcs, right? Then I grab my first bit of paint, and this one is called Magic Blue, and it's one of the speed paints from the Army Painter. This one is version 2.0, so there shouldn't be any reactivation issues. I've just started playing around with the speed paints, and I only have the 2.0 version, and so far I have had no issues with reactivation or anything whatsoever. I think they work really well, and I mean, they do pretty much the same thing that contrast paints do, for instance. Then for the checkers, I've decided that some of them should be purple, and for that I am using another speed paint, and this one is called Purple Swarm, and it's quite similar to Loxion Purple in its sort of overall feel and tone, I think. Then I have decided that the third sort of major color on this project should be orange, just because, I don't know, blue, purple, orange, that seems to go well together. Well, perhaps not, but I thought it would be fun, so here we are. This one is Magma Drought Flame, and it's one of the contrast paints from Citadal. Then I've decided that the other color in both the stripes and the checkers should be sort of a gray-black, and I'm again going with a speed paint from Army Painter, and this one is called Grim Black. And the reason for that is because I wanted something that has a nice dark base color, while at the same time not being quite as dark as, let's say, Black Legion from the contrast range, because then it would not be really easy to see it if you added some shadows, which I'm going to do later on. So I thought this was sort of a nice middle point. And I know that my camera sort of keeps going in and out of focus, and I don't really know why that happens. I would love to have a better camera setup at some point, but right now this is what I have to work with. So I hope you guys can work with that as well. Then for adding some shadows, I go with my cross-hatching technique. As you can see here, it's just a bunch of thin diagonal lines. And here for the orange, I'm going with Snakebite Leather, which is one of the contrast paints. I also do a dark outline of the sort of entire piece that is painted orange, and also around the rivets, as you can see. And it's just to make it really easy, also from a distance, to see what's going on. So that's why I really like sharp definitions and bright outlines and dark, sort of dark lines, you might say, because it just helps make it a lot easier to see really quickly what's going on. Then for the blue and also for the purple parts of the armor plates, I am using Achillean Green, which is also a contrast paint, and I use that in the exact same way as you can see I did with the Snakebite Leather on the orange. I do some diagonal lines, some cross-hatching, and then I do an outline around the rivet and also around the armor plate itself. And you'll notice that the outlines are quite thick, and that's because I'm going to be doing an edge highlight later on, and I want the dark outline to be clearly visible behind the edge highlight once I'm done. Then you can also see here for the checkers, I'm not doing the entire cross-hatching, I'm just doing one half of it, you might say, with some diagonal lines. So for the lower half of each of the squares, I'm putting in about 3 thin lines. First with the Achillean Green for the purple, and then with Black Legion, the very dark black contrast paint for the black parts of the checkers. Next up, it's time to add some highlights to the gray or black parts of the model, and the first color I'm using here is called Steel Gray, and it's from Vallejo. And you'll notice here, I just do the exact same thing as I just did with the Black Legion contrast paint. I'm adding in some diagonal lines, and just it's here for the top half of each of the squares. I could of course do like the full cross hatching, but I think just having the diagonal lines in one direction makes this part of the model a little bit easier to read, which is for a gaming piece one of the most important things, I think. Then I add a outline just again on the top half here, as you can see. I did the same with the black paint for the lower parts of the squares, and to again sort of really highlight the difference between light and shadow. Then lastly, I'm adding in a little bit of a second highlight color, and for this I'm using a color called Glacier Blue, and it's also from Vallejo. So I only add 1 or 2 lines, and again only at the really at the top of each of the squares. And then I also just add just a slight touch of this color to sort of the light outline, and so it's sort of more or less only the very edge of the square that is going to be highlighted using this color. I think this helps just make everything a little bit sharper, because as you'll notice, I drew this by hand very quickly, and so it's not the sharpest design you might ever come across. And so just little touches such as this, taking care to add highlights and shadows exactly where I want them, it just helps bring it all together, I find. I also use the same colors as you can see here for the stripes, and again this is the last layer of highlights for the gray parts of the stripes. And I think the key with something like this, particularly when we'll get to it a little bit later on, some of the colors are quite busy, is just to be relatively consistent with the way you apply the paint, so that the model will be easy to read, even though it's, as I said, quite busy. I know. I mean, I kind of like it that way. Then for the blue parts of the armor, I am using a paint called Blaster Blue. It's a fluorescent blue paint from Huge Miniatures, and I'm using that in the exact same way as I used the gray paints on the black and gray parts of the armor. So just some thin diagonal lines to put in some highlights. And you will notice here that I am doing the edge highlight as I said I would. So you can still, I think, quite easily see the dark outline that I painted on first underneath or behind the edge highlight. But I just think this combination makes everything stand out and look quite sharp, even though, I mean, as I said, this is for a gaming piece, so if I make small mistakes, I'm not going to spend a lot of time going back and redoing anything or retracing my tracks if I think it's going to be like good enough, which is what I'm going for when I'm doing, you know, models for my gaming army. It's just something that I think helps with the overall look and presentation, and it's just not that difficult or time consuming to do. Then for the last layer of highlights for the blue, I mix in a little bit of white with the Blaster Blue, and then I do everything all over just a little bit more sparingly and only at sort of the very top of the armor panels, and also only on sort of the edges. Like you could see here, sort of at the corner on the edges. I don't want it all to look like it's sort of very pale baby blue. I just want it to look sort of like a nice vibrant blue color. It's a little bit more difficult to do with blue. Like a fluorescent blue color just looks like a pale blue color. It's just not quite as bright as, for instance, the fluorescent greens and pinks are. Then for highlighting the orange parts of the armor, I'm using again a fluorescent paint from Huge Miniatures, and this one is called Laser Orange. And speaking of bright colors, in real life this is very vibrant and really bright, but on camera it unfortunately shows up somewhat faded, I'm afraid. So I use the exact same technique here with the orange as I did with the blues, lots of small diagonal lines and then a nice edge highlight all around the armor panel. And as you can see here, probably not all of the lines are exactly the same size. Some of them are a little bit, thicker than others, and some of them deviate slightly in the sort of angle they have. And if you were going for like a competition painting piece, you would definitely probably have to go back in and correct that. But since this is a gaming piece and I'm going for the overall effect of the model, I'm completely fine with it. Then for the last layer of highlights on the orange parts, I am using Flash Kids Yellow from Citadal. And I could use a, let's say, fluorescent yellow color, but I'm not going to, because fluorescent yellow colors are very bright and cool and fun, but they also have a slight greenish tint to them. And I wanted the orange here to have like a warm tone, because both the blue, the purple and the gray are going to be very cool, and so I wanted to have like also a contrast when it came to the tone of the model. Then for the purple parts of the armor, I am first highlighting it with a purple paint from Huge Miniatures, and this one is called Ultraviolet, and it's also one of the fluorescent paints. Even though I was quite happy with the purple look, especially next to the orange, which was a bit of a surprise to me. I'm always surprised when I do something with purple and I actually like it. I think purple is a little bit difficult to paint with. It's sort of like it doesn't really want to play well with the other colors. But I quite like the purple, but I still thought it needed just to be a little bit more bright and a little bit more vibrant. So I ended up using some cyber pink as the last layer of highlights, because I think highlighting with just a lighter shade of purple often leads to the purple looking like something from sort of My Little Pony, a sort of pastel look. And I didn't really want that, particularly not when you have already a slight feeling of the pastel with the blue. I wanted something that would be just as vibrant as the orange parts of the armor. Then lastly, I went over both the checkers and the stripes with a bit of the Black Legion contrast paint, and it was just in sort of an attempt to make everything a little bit more sharp and make sure that it looked as easy to read and understand as I could make it, without actually spending like 20 hours measuring the exact size of each single square. I think it helps a lot if you just have the time to go back over it with a thin brush and just paint in these lines. You could also use a thin black Sharpie for the exact same purpose, and that would probably be just a little bit easier to control if you had one on hand. I didn't, so I used a brush. And here you can see the final result. I think it was, it's always fun to do something that's scratch built and orky, and this was no exception. And I just think a truck is sort of, I wouldn't say it's low effort, it's just something that you can make really fun and build relatively quickly, because it's not that complicated of a build. So I'm particularly pleased, as you can see here, with the cracked windshield that the driver is shooting through, and the orc boy who's hanging from a chain in the middle of the back of the truck, dangling. And also the wrecking ball that is now a barrel with some sort of toxic goo coming out of it. It was just a lot of fun to build and also a lot of fun to paint. And of course, since I used a lot of fluorescent paints, they will glow under a UV light. So this is what the truck looks like under a black light. And as I've said so many times before in these videos, it serves no practical purpose whatsoever. It's just a lot of fun, and I like to imagine that my orc boys are now going to a rave party in style. So that was what I wanted to show you today. But before you leave, I would just like to take the opportunity to thank the wonderful people who support Dice and Demons over on Patreon. So thank you so much to Thomas Madsen, Scott Broadway, Gwenna L, Queen's Wolf, Double J's Terrain, Mola Mola, Cyber Fossil, TJ Kubiak, Mando Project, Starcon85, S Bear, Echinocicus, Firelord21, and Elliot Philby. If you want to join them in supporting Dice and Demons, I will leave a link to Patreon in the show notes. Also, if you want to have some really cool fluorescent paints for your next painting project, you can buy them over at Huge Miniatures, and I have a discount code that will give you 5% off, while at the same time also helping to support this channel. I'll leave a link to that also in the show notes. If you want to stay up to date on my painting projects, you can follow me as Dice and Demons over on X, formerly known as Twitter, and on Instagram as well. So thank you so much for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time. Bye!